So today we're going to create a Flappy Bird style game where we are going to click the mouse button to have the bird flap and to have it fly through the middle of some obstacles. So we want to get started with just white boxing this, meaning we're going to create some just primitive geometric shapes to get the functionality of our game started. And then from there, we will add in game art and a game over screen to finish it. So we'll probably have a couple different parts to this. But to get started, we want to go ahead and create a folder for our sprites. I'm working in Unity in a 2D project. In here, before we get started, we're going to change the shape of our screen. So in my game window here, I want to click on the plus sign under the aspect, and we're going to add one called tall. And it's going to be an aspect ratio, and we're going to make it 9:16, basically turning a wide screen sideways. So this looks more like the size of a screen that Flappy Bird would be playing on. So within our sprites, I'm going to open that folder and simply create some scripts in here. So I can also click on this little plus sign I right-clicked. You can click on the plus sign and go to sprites. And I'm going to start with a triangle for my bird. So I'm going to put player here. And we can add that onto our screen. And let's go in and make our obstacle. We'll use a square for our obstacle. If you can't spell obstacle, you can put pipe. It doesn't really matter. So I'm going to bring this obstacle. Let me see if I can bring this. Oh, I need to go over to my scene here. Okay. And I'm just going to put that off the screen here and make it go down here, something like that. And after I have that done, I'm going to make a copy of this, but before I do, I'm going to go ahead and add some physics onto this. Let's add in a box collider to that, as well as a rigid body 2D, so that we can move it and collide with it. Because we don't want this affected by gravity, let's go ahead and set that to be kinematic. And that will work for our obstacle. I'll collapse these down for now so we can work with that. And then I'm going to duplicate that obstacle. There we go. And I want these to be grouped together. Let's bring this up to here. Maybe a little bit more space in here. And then once I have that, I want these to be grouped together. And probably before you do that, you want to look under the transform. Let's clean this up, maybe make that nice and neat, maybe make that 3, maybe 4. And let's do the same thing here. So those are lined up. And then I want to create a empty game object to contain both of those. Let's call that full obstacle. We'll be making a prefab out of this. And then I want to parent these obstacles. I'm going to drag the obstacles into the full obstacle, so they're now children of that. So they're basically grouped together within my scene. Let's go ahead and add some physics to our player. So let's add a polygon collider to that, as well as a rigid body 2D. And we'll leave that rigid body 2D as dynamic, so it's affected by gravity. And we'll create one last sprite in here. And let's make another square. We'll call this ground. And let's add that in. And we can make this be maybe a green color. And let's position it down at the bottom of our screen here. You can make it a little bit bigger than the screen. It doesn't make a difference if it's a little bit more off the screen, but something like that. And let's give it some physics as well. It's not going to be falling, but we do need to have a box collider onto it. Whoopsie. Nope. There we go. And a rigid body 2D. And we'll set this as kinematic so it doesn't get gravity applied to it. All right, let's save what we have so far and give that a little test play. And there's how that works. Good. So if you want this to look a little bit better, you can maybe change the rotation. Let's change it to 90. That's probably going the wrong way. I want it to fly to the right. How about negative 90? Okay. So now let's add in some scripts here. Let's start by controlling our player. So our player is just going to move up and down in the column. It's just going to be kind of just flapping up as we click our box. So let's go to our player and add a new script to that. Let's call that player controller. Yep, let's create that. Let's just go ahead and double click on that to open that up in Visual Studio. So what we want to do in player controller is we want to go ahead and just have it so that when we click, that bird is just going to jump up. And how much it jumps up is kind of going to be up to your preference a little bit here. But we're going to have that jump up and down. So once we are in Visual Studio, we will work on the script for our player controller. So what we want to add in here is a speed variable to control the amount of speed that it jumps up into the air or the amount that it jumps. So we'll make this a float because we're affecting a transform property. Now, if we make it public, that it will allow us to edit that in Unity and set its value there so we can kind of play around with it while we're in Unity. We don't have to always go back into Visual Studio for that. And let's also add in our object. Will be affecting, because we're using physics, the rigid body 2D component of our player. And let's just call that player. So we won't be putting anything in start. We're going to come down to update. And we're going to be looking at if they press the mouse button down. So we're going to use the input object within Unity. And we're going to be looking at whether they are pressing the mouse button down. So you see get mouse button down. And that's a method that's checking for the mouse button. 0 is the first mouse button. And then you can have 0, 1, or 2. So if they click the mouse button down, we simply want to have it go back up. We're going to impact the velocity of our player, which is basically the vector of the player that we are controlling its movement. And we can use vector2.up to say we want to go up 1 unit within that, and then we can multiply that by speed so that we can impact that as we're going along. So that should get us so that when we run our game in Unity, we can get it to work. Now we'll get an error down here saying that if we look at our player, that this, let's collapse these down a little bit here, that in here, let me see here. Let me see here. It doesn't like float. Let's set this equal to, see if that makes a difference here. This is argument 1. 18 here. Yeah, I jumped. This is mouse button. There we go. If get mouse button down. Here we go. Just jumped a little bit too quickly on that. Okay, good. So now we can see this script over here. And for my player rigid body, it says none. So I need to come over here and associate my player object from my game with that rigid body that's right there. So now if I come in here and click, oh, I can just barely hold it up. So that's where I can come in here and play around with my speed. And you can kind of see how much you want it to bounce as it's going along. And you can make adjustments on that. You can actually even make adjustments while you're playing, and you can test that out. But any adjustment that you make in your game will not be saved here. So just remember to come back and set it to whatever you decide that's there. Okay, from here, we need to get the obstacle moving. So to do that, we are going to create a script onto our obstacle. I'm going to call obstacle controller. And we simply want to have our obstacle slide across the screen. Okay? So it's going to be very similar, but there's just not going to be a mouse button involved. It's going to work automatically as we're going along. So I'm going to put another speed variable in here. And in our update, we want to move that. So we're just going to affect the position of our obstacle. We're going to add to it. We're going to have it move from right to left, sliding across. So we are going to add to the transform position a vector 3 dot left. Okay, it's going to move it 1 unit to the left, but we can affect that by speed, so we can adjust that as we go along. So speed's just going to be a multiplier on there, and we want it to be doing it constantly as the game is going along. So we don't want it just to do it one time. We want to affect it by the time. So we're going to say time.delta time, and that'll basically reduce the amount that it's moving. So rather than just jumping 1 unit, it would move way too fast. Time.delta time is like a fraction of our game time, and so it'll move at a more constant rate across the screen. So let's put that into here. Because we're using transform position here of the obstacle that it's on, we don't need to have the rigid body because it will be impacting the object that it's on right there. So let's take a look at how that looks. Nothing moving. So what's going on? Well, our speed is set to 0 here. So let's give that a value, because multiplying by 0 is not going to give us any movement. And there it's moving. And so again, we could test this out. We could say 2. What do we, what does that look like as we're playing along here? Maybe we like 2 better. We can. The nice thing about having these set as public is you can go in and always see what that looks like as you're going along. Okay, that gives us some basic functionality. The next step will be to make a prefab of our obstacle and set it up for spawning multiple versions that we then can also add a score to.